of 2025. And I do want to make sure that we are recording. Okay, it looks like we are recording. That's great. Today's topic is New Year, New Habits, applying the science of habits to environmental behavior change. And just to introduce myself, I am Dr. Stacy Small-Lorenz, and I am the new program lead for the Baywise Living Landscapes program. I am thrilled to be here. I am in a new position as agent, a statewide agent for residential landscape ecology. So one of the aspects of my new position is to manage the Baywise program. And I'm super happy also here to have Elizabeth McGarry today from Extension, who does a ton of work behind the scenes. She produced a beautiful year-end report. She fields a ton of questions. She helps to manage signs, signage, all types of things to help keep the Baywise program going. And I know a lot of you have communicated with her before, but if you don't mind just waving and saying hello, Elizabeth, that would be great.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for being here this evening at the end of a long day. Okay, so we're going to let a few more people in. So, just as a reminder, University of Maryland programs, activities, and facilities are available to all without regard to race, color, sex, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, marital status, age, national origin, political affiliation, physical or mental disability, religion, protected veteran status, genetic information, personal appearance, or any other legally protected class. If you've just arrived, there is a survey link that we dropped in the chat box. Elizabeth, are you able to copy that and drop that one more time? And that helps us to know who we are reaching here in Maryland. We're going to warm up with an easy question. And this really does pertain to what we're doing tonight. The question is, what was one resolution that you made for 2025? How's it going? Or if you're not so into resolutions, or you kind of skipped that this year, what is one habit that you would like to establish or change? Perhaps in 2025 or eventually. Let's use the chat box. And I promise you that I will share my resolution for 2025. But I want to let you all go first. William says time to plant more. Carol says better nutrition. I'm going to get a few more before I give mine away. Start a regular exercise program. Excellent. Learn more about climate change. Get rid of lawns. That's great. I'm working on that too, slowly, bit by bit. It's hard. It's hard. Drink less wine. That's a tough one. Finish what I started. Okay, I'm gonna share. Oh, increase natives in my garden, eat better. Oh, this is fantastic. 2025 is gonna be the best year ever. I can tell already. Um, so I'll share mine. And I went through so many possible resolutions before I settled on the one that I really felt was going to make the biggest difference because, I love New Year's. I love making resolutions. It might be one of my favorite holidays. And I'm used to making a list of resolutions that has 20, 40 things on it that I want to do in life. And then I get really, really overwhelmed and I stop sleeping because I've got so much that I want to get done. And I realized that the most important resolution I could make would be to sleep more. Not only sleep more, but get better sleep. And that actually requires setting up a whole bunch of habits that I've never learned because I'm a night owl. I'll admit it. Even though I have a degree in ornithology and many years I was getting up way before dawn to get out in the field, I couldn't go to bed before midnight because there was still so much to do. I was just so excited about whatever it was that I was, trying to get done. But I was always tired and always exhausted. And I realized when I really started working on practicing getting better sleep, everything else in my life got magically easier. All the things that I thought were problems really weren't problems at all. They tended to work themselves out a lot more easily. So I still have a long way to go to start getting a solid night's sleep. But I am trying to set an alarm to go to bed by 10, which it's hard. I've broken my resolution a few times already, but I'm sticking with it. So that's my resolution. Sleep more, sleep better. I'm seeing a lot of amazing resolutions, plans, new habits. These are all great. So we're going to be talking about habit change tonight. And it's kind of a fun topic. It's also a really serious topic. Um, and one thing that I realize is I review the Baywise program and all the amazing work that you're doing and the Baywise checklist, the yardstick, is that we're asking people to do a lot, to do an awful lot, and to make a lot of changes, a lot of habit changes. So if you think about that one habit that you're going to work on this year, exercising 3 times a week, spending more time in nature. How hard is that? Drinking less wine, going to bed at 10. That's really, really hard for me. I'm telling you that you would think that would be really easy. Put on your jammies and jump into bed. It is not an easy thing for me to do. It requires many habit changes to actually make that happen. So I want to think tonight about what it is, the enormity of what it is that we are asking people to do through the Baywise program, and think about maybe how can we streamline what we're asking people to do and the way we're asking them to do it so that we can get um, big change with a series of small actions, or at least come away tonight being a little savvier and a little bit more knowledgeable about what a habit is and what it takes to change a habit in ourselves, but also in society when we're working to affect behavior change with others. So here is our learning objective for this evening. Feels like we're back in school, right? But we are. Students will be able to describe how habits are formed and articulate strategies for environmental behavior change in their communities. So here are the success criteria. And if you choose to do the mini quiz assessment, this should be able to count for continuing education credits through the Master Gardener program. So these are the kinds of things you're going to see on the mini quiz. Define habit. Describe how habits are formed or changed. Name 3 components of the habit loop. We'll get into that. Give an example of a keystone habit. Describe 3 strategies for environmental behavior change and identify a keystone habit for Baywise, Waterwise. So what is a habit? Let's start with a definition. Let's start with a definition here. Oops, go back. A habit is a regular pattern of behavior learned through repetition, doing it over and over and over again, the same way, typically prompted by a situational cue that requires little thought or decision making. So examples of habits could be putting toothpaste on your toothbrush. That's something that people didn't always do. In fact, it was only a Pepsodent marketing campaign that introduced toothpaste to the world. Toothpaste with a tingly mint ingredient in it that made people crave that tingly feeling. Imagine that. We all put toothpaste, most of us probably put toothpaste on our toothbrush now, right? But that was actually the product of a major advertising marketing campaign. Getting in our car and driving, series of habits that we, really had to think hard about when we were first learning to drive, but we can just now get in the car, put the key in, reverse without thinking about all of the step-by-step procedures. Turning lights on or off or biting fingernails. These are all examples of habits that we develop over time. And once they're ingrained, they're kind of hard to undo or to learn to do differently. But what habits also do, they free up the other parts of our brain that are responsible for innovation and problem solving to do that higher order rational thinking, while the habit part of our brain just kind of takes care of these automatic routines. Now, there's a book that I really enjoy. It's called The Power of Habit. And actually, I read the book, the first version that it came out, and now I'm rereading the 10th anniversary version. It's called The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business. Has anybody read this book? Is anyone familiar with this book? It's a really fun read if you haven't encountered it already. But Charles Duhigg, he won a Pulitzer Prize. He's a New York Times journalist, and he really delved into all of the research behind habits. And he has defined what he calls the habit loop. And it's essentially 3 parts: cue, routine, reward. Cue, routine, reward. This is basically a loop that takes place deep in our brain in the basal ganglia. And that reward is basically a little drop of dopamine, a little neurotransmitter reward that our brain gets when we do something right. It brings a certain sense of satisfaction or a sensory reward. So he gave actually learned the Pepsodent example in this book. The cue being, a person senses like a film on their teeth. They go through the toothbrush routine with the toothpaste, and the reward is the tingling sensation. And the craving is what powers that habit loop. And it's a craving for a particular sensation that our brain has learned to recognize and and reward with a little neurotransmitter reward. So that craving continues to drive that habitat loop. And he gives many, many examples of how the habit loop, plays out in our daily lives, in all of our many, many habits and routines. So this was some of the original studies on this took place in MIT at MIT, I believe in the 1990s, studying little lab rat responses to a click or a sound cue, running a maze and finding their food reward at the end. And as they practiced it over and over and over again, it turned out they would continue to run the routine after a while just on hearing the cue, the click. He gives another example and talks about how habits can be changed, but it's hard to change the cue and the reward. The one thing that is easier to change is to identify the routine and swap the routine out for a different routine that still provides some satisfaction. So he gives the example of drinking alcohol and um, some of the successes that programs like AA have had by assigning people mentors or sponsors and substituting the drinking with socializing and the conversation. So the craving is a craving for some kind of relief from stress rather than using the alcohol as a reward, socializing, checking in with a sponsor, going to a meeting and talking in a group. So this is an example that he gives of keeping the cue, providing the same reward, which is a sense of relief from stress, but inserting a new routine to achieve the reward. So all of this takes place deep in our brain in a very evolutionarily ancient part of our brain called the basal ganglia. And what it does, it basically evaluates sensory cues sent to the basal ganglia from different regions of the brain. It's a small part of our brain, and it's actually several structures that are working together, sending a series of signals back and forth. But basically, it approves or denies movement signals. It's essentially a switchboard. It's responsible for emotional and movement regulation, excitatory and inhibitory connections. And it's where procedural learning happens. It's where we learn the step-by-step of a new process. So imagine learning to ice skate, how we have to learn every step from lacing the skates to standing up to doing a turn. And it really, in the beginning, requires a lot of thought. But over time of learning and practicing the procedure, we start to master a skill, and that is the habit formation. So we all can think back to something that we learned to do in our life that was really, really challenging in the beginning, whether it was tying our shoes or riding a bike. You could probably think of many different examples. The basal ganglia is responsible for that step-by-step procedural learning. And it's about the size of standard-sized gumball. Now, if you don't believe that the basal ganglia could have such an outsized influence on all of our habits and movement, these are some of the familiar disorders that are related to the basal ganglia: Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, ADHD, addiction, multiple sclerosis, Tourette syndrome, and many more. So it's a really important regulatory center in our brain. So I started to think about how could we apply this concept of the habit loop to think through how we establish certain habits with managing our landscapes or sustaining wildlife or some of the practices that you do in your garden that we're trying to teach to other people to establish new routines. So I thought, well, why don't I try to think of some example from my own ecological landscape practice? And that's my winter bluebird care. One of our Baywise practices is provide fresh drinking water. That sounds great and easy, but it's actually a lot of work to maintain a clean bird bath with recirculating water that doesn't freeze up in the winter, especially when you've got your outdoor faucets turned off to keep your pipes from freezing. So I have established a queue when I see the messy bird bath. I don't even think anymore. I grab it, I take it in, I dump it, I scrub it. I put my brush in the exact same place each time, so it's really easy to grab it and scrub it, take it out, refill it with a watering can. And my reward is seeing that bluebird taking a fresh drink of water the next morning. And when I see that, I do feel overwhelmingly happy. That's like one of my favorite things to see when I get up in the morning is the bluebirds drinking and eating right outside my front door. So I've developed a habit loop around my bluebird care. It wasn't always like that, and sometimes I would procrastinate, and then I didn't feel good about that, and I really had to make the routine really, really smooth so that it was easy and manageable. A lot of people come to me and say, I can't get bluebirds. I put food out and everything and they don't come in. It's the key is having that heated bird bath in the winter. But it does require maintenance and it requires self-discipline to go out in freezing temperatures to make sure that your bird bath isn't freezing up and that you're keeping it clean. So now I want to give you a chance to try the same thing, to take a moment to reflect on one habit of your own that relates to nature, gardening, ecological landscape. Maybe it's something that's in Baywise, maybe it's not. But I want you to try to identify the cue, the routine, and the reward. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just I just want you to try to practice with this concept. So this is why I asked everyone to bring paper and pencil or pen or color pencil with you. So if you don't have it, just go ahead and grab it. Or if you just want to type it out in the chat box and share if you're feeling outgoing, that's great too. So let's just take a couple of minutes, just think this through and sketch your own habit loop for this activity. Sketch your own habit loop. What's the cue? What's the routine? And what's the reward? So the cue could be something you see. It could be a visual cue. It could be an olfactory cue, something you smell. It could be something you hear. It could be something you sense in the temperature. Any sort of sensory cue. Then what's your routine that you jump to? And then what's your reward? Shelly had a question. How do I keep the bird water from freezing? I have a heater. It looks like a rock. It's one that you can buy at like the wild bird store. It plugs in and it thaws the water. So yeah, it has to be heated just enough. It's not like a spa. It's just enough to keep it from freezing. Okay, Q, empty bird feeder. Okay, Chrissy feels annoyed. Oh, and William says Q, empty bird feeder too. Chrissy feels annoyed when she sees an empty bird feeder. I do too. Habit, go fill first thing in the morning. Reward, watching the birds makes her feel happy. Okay, so and that happiness, that could be like an endorphin response or a little dopamine response. I don't know exactly the neurotransmitters going on there, but that happiness is real. That's a real reward that we actually experience in our brain. David said the most important habit that I don't have but need is making regular journal entries about his garden. You know, journaling is a technique that he goes into in depth in the power of habit. That just journaling about exercise, just journaling about some activity that you are trying to start or do better, um, raises so much awareness. And it is really a powerful tool for habit change. So Deborah says cue, drought, routine, water, containers. And then can you finish that out with the reward, Deborah? Herbs and pollinators. That's great. And for me, like if I I really love bird song, and I'm really tuned into like when the song sparrow, the first song sparrow songs I hear, or when I hear the mockingbird singing for the first time of the year, when the catbirds return. But hearing the bird song is actually a reward for me. So, anything that I've done to create habitat for that catbird to come back and nest, when I hear that catbird return and I hear that song, it's it's really exciting. It's really, really energizing feeling. So these are the kinds of things that I feel like this group, as a group of master gardeners who have mastered some of these things, who have experienced these things firsthand, can share in a way that is so inspiring and so motivating for others that are just getting started, that I feel like it's more important, this first step of helping people connect the cues, the routines, and the rewards, and getting them hooked on the joys of nature and cultivating nature in your yard or in your neighborhood. Um, Getting people started on that first step is every bit as important as that final step of awarding a sign. And I would argue that it's more important because that's where it's kind of a make or break deal whether people are even going to get started. So helping people connect the cues, the routines, and the rewards. It's really important skill. So the more you think about your different habits and how you got started and how you make it easy or even pleasurable to do some of these things in a new way, or maybe new to your neighbor, you can begin to help convey that and communicate that to your neighbors. Now, he also talks in Power of Habit about keystone habits, and these are small actions that make a disproportionately big change in the system that you're trying to affect. So you can compare it to the architectural keystone that holds up an arch, or I'm sure you've heard about keystone species that have incredibly important roles in ecosystem function, that really keep the ecosystem in balance. Well, there are keystone habits that have a disproportionate transformative effect on the system that you are managing. So I want to talk about what a keystone habit for Baywise might look like. And I feel like most importantly, we want to look for those habits that are going to have multiple benefits, not only water quality, but water quality, climate resilience, and biodiversity benefits, and try to identify a few keystone habits in Baywise that we're going to really emphasize and promote for 2025. And talk about them this way. Like, these are habits, these are new habits, but once you get this habit established, it's going to make a big difference for everything else that you want to accomplish in your landscape. So let's take a look at an example. And this is a carry on from our last session, or the last session that I led. Oh, actually, I've got a few more criteria. Then I'll give you my keystone habit for 2025. Okay, multiple benefits. We just talked about that. We want a keystone habit to apply to most suburban urban locations statewide. So we don't want it to be hyper local. We want it to be something that's going to apply almost anywhere that's a suburban urban landscape. And not just if you have a big lawn, but even if you live in an apartment in the city. Relatively low, no cost. We don't want there to be a really high cost barrier to getting started. Clear and easy to grasp, simple to articulate. You've got an elevator pitch, you're talking to someone for 1 minute or 3 minutes. It's got to be really easy to explain. And it can be established through repeated practice by following this habit loop: cue, routine, reward. We don't want it to be too general or too specific, so we'll practice with that a little bit. We'll evaluate a few potential keystone habits for whether they're too general or too specific. So I want to start with my keystone habit for 2025, a small action that makes a big change: recycle yard waste on site. I've talked about this in some blogs and the last time I led a session, but I can't say it enough that this is really a keystone habit that's going to begin to transform everything else. And it hits all three of those criteria for biodiversity, for water quality, and for climate resilience. So examples of practices that are in our yardstick right now include leaf mulching, leaving the leaves where they fall, grass cycling, mulching with arborist wood chips, composting kitchen scraps and yard waste, creating brush piles, and leaving logs and stumps and even dead branches where you can, where it's safe to do so. Okay, so a lot of the stuff ends up getting hauled off, sent off, hauled off to the municipal dump or facilities. But really, by leaving it in place, we can actually create a lot more habitat value, a lot more soil organic matter, which makes soils more absorbent of stormwater, and also um, is also beneficial for drought resilience because you're retaining more soil, more moisture in the soil when you have more soil organic matter. And as gardeners, you know that then you're going to have much better substrate for getting those native plants established. You may even actually have more self-recruiting native plants. I get a lot of oaks coming up in my leaf litter. Turns out the blue jays love to stash acorns in leaf litter, and they forget where they've stashed some of their acorns. So really, I feel like it's one of those habits that costs nothing. It's a lot less carbon emissions, but it actually has an outsized benefit. So let's take a look. Is it too general? Is it too specific? So I think recycle yard waste on site is just about right for a statewide keystone habit. Too general would be to say increase soil organic matter. Yes, we do want to do that. That's our purpose. But it's not specific enough for someone to understand what you want them to do. Maybe too specific is grass cycle. Yes, grass cycling is great, like leaving those grass clippings right on the lawn as much as you can. That's awesome, unless you're right along the edge of the bay. But not everybody has a lawn. Some people might live in the forest or live in the city and not have a lawn or not be the one that manages the lawn. They might not have jurisdiction over the lawn in their HOA or, wherever they live or in their apartment building. So that might be too specific to be a statewide keystone habit. But recycle yard waste on site, that encompasses a number of different practices that then we can talk to people about and help them tailor this habit to their particular site or location. Okay, so let's take a look. What would a habit loop look like that illustrates this new habit of recycling yard and kitchen waste on site? So we're going to use the three components of the habit loop: cue, routine, and reward. You could use an example from any one of those practices of recycling yard or kitchen waste. Let's take about 3 minutes and see what you can come up with. What might be a cue for recycling yard or kitchen waste? Okay, the cue is kitchen waste piling up. You chopped a bunch of stuff for vegetable soup and you've got a bunch of scraps piling up, food scraps, or you've got too much in the compost bin. Okay, so what's our routine going to be now? And you're going to explain it to somebody who doesn't compost right now. You're at an environmental fair, you're at an Earth Day fair, and you're going to explain to someone who's totally new to this. They just moved out on their own and they've heard about composting. Connie says find a spot in the woods to put it. So I have a new worm bin. It's a new old worm bin. I had it in storage and I just pulled it out so I can get it ready for a demonstration. And I love feeding my little worms. So I can't wait to have, a banana peel to chop up or an apple core to feed them. So when I feel like I'm directly feeding something, I'm much better at composting than if I just have to dump a bunch of scraps into my compost barrel. And it fills up over the winter. And it's not breaking down as fast as it should. And so both sides of our barrel are full. So I'm excited to have my worms back in action because they can actually speed the process. So I've got my scraps. I'm gonna walk them over to my worms. I'm gonna check to make sure their soil moisture is good, and I'm gonna give them a snack. So that's my routine. You might have a different routine with your scraps. So what's your reward? Where's the reward in all of this? Let's make it a sensory reward. What do you do with your compost when it's all broken down? Anne says, lovely, rich compost for fertilizing my plants. Who loves the smell of really rich soil in your garden when you're out there working in your garden? Lovely, rich compost. Even that tomato that has all of that flavor, that's a good sensory reward. Black gold. I love it. Like who just loves having like the feel of that really rich compost? I mean, I can feel it on my fingertips when we talk about it. Black gold. I love it. Yes. And it doesn't smell bad. And people don't want to believe that. They're like, oh, it's going to smell, but actually it's like really nice and really rich. Okay, so you can see how this potentially goes, how you set your cue to be your banana peel that you snip up, or your apple core, or your veggie choppings, how you're going to take it to your barrel, take it to your bin, take it to your worms. But your reward, you're going to connect that with something sensory, and that's going to be the motivator, and you actually develop a craving for that. And I was actually went away for the weekend. I was thinking about my worms and hoping they weren't getting hungry and all of that, but it turns out they were just fine. Fed them as soon as I got back. Um, but yeah, so you can do this with any habit that we're talking about, any environmental habit that we're trying to implement. Okay, so I have a Padlet now. We're going to take a minute to discuss the following questions. How many habits is it reasonable to expect one person or family to change in a single year? Think about your own habit, your own resolution for 2025, or that habit you're really working on changing. It doesn't have to be a nature thing. How many habits do you think it's reasonable for one person or family to change in 1 year? Sometimes it's even harder when you try to get an entire family on board with changing habits. Do you believe that establishing one keystone habit could make it easier to change or establish other habits? And what does this imply for our Baywise yardstick? So I'm going to drop that link in the chat box. Okay, so William says one to two says Linda. Carmel says one. Lane says three. Okay, and we're asking people to change how many habits to get a Baywise certification? At least how many? A lot, a whole lot. Christy says the yardstick's complicated for a novice and lots of habits. I've had Baywise, very dedicated Baywise master gardeners tell me more than once. So many people look at the yardstick and they just recycle. Hopefully they recycle it. Maybe they just throw it out. I don't know. But like it's a lot, right? I mean, it's all good stuff. It's a lot of good practices, but not all of the practices apply everywhere. And if we could find a way to condense it into you're changing one or two habits a year through a variety of practices you could choose from, but it really could begin to start to feel a lot more manageable. So I'm really trying to work on synthesizing it and breaking it down into these keystone habits that will get us that transformational change across a much larger landscape by making it a lot easier for people to enter and get started because we're all going to be really savvy and educated about habits and habit change and what it really takes. But we need to be realistic and we need to be empathetic and supportive. And I think the most important role that our Baywise Master Gardeners can play is that sponsorship, mentoring, community connection, neighbor to neighbor support system for making these habit changes. I know that's a really different way of thinking about it than, we're the crew that comes out and installs a sign for you after you've made 36 habit changes. But it's important, and that work of that first habit change is what's going to accelerate all of the other habit change. So I hope that you're trying out the Padlet. Did it work out for you? Did the Padlet open? Oh, good. We've got some posts on the habit. So when you post on the Padlet, when you go to the Padlet, there's a little plus sign down in the bottom corner that you can click to add your post. Okay. So I really do want your input. So if you think of something, you can come back to it throughout tonight's presentation. All right. So I do want to see your comments. I'll come back and read everything. So the big question is, what does this all mean for Baywise and the Baywise yardstick? Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to get I know we've got some writing on the screen, and it's awesome that people were getting creative, but I'm trying to figure out um, how to clear that writing from the screen. Are you seeing that too, Elizabeth?
I am.
You are.
Kathy wants to know what habits make a real difference to the bay.
Okay, yeah. So wow, that's a great segue. And I think those habits that adjust water quality, climate resilience, and biodiversity, we're going to start to identify what some of those are. Okay, so I'm going to suggest these five here. And again, I'm sorry about the marking on the screen. I'm not sure how to get that out of there. Um, Let me see if there's a clear. Oh, look at that. I have a little eraser. Okay. Yeah, I think if we can write on our paper instead of writing on the screen, that would make it a little easier for everyone. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about what some of those habits might be. We're going to evaluate some of these that I'm suggesting here, but I'm not saying these are the final thing, and I'm not even saying these are all right. Okay, guys, I want your input. So, recycle yard debris on site. We already talked about that. Capture precipitation where it falls. We have a lot of practices on the yardstick that address this. I suspect that this is going to be a keystone habit that we are going to really, really want to be promoting and talking about it this way as much as possible. So there are a number of different practices on the yardstick. What are some examples of capturing precipitation where it falls that are on the yardstick right now? I'll give you one is rain gardens. There are a number of them. Some of them are obvious and some of them might not be as obvious. Rain barrels. Yes, rain barrels. What other practices? How about how about not riparian, but native vegetation plantings of mulched with wood chips, plantings of native vegetation. You can place them in such a location that they're capturing water, absorbing it before it runs off of the property. But there are also sustainable lawn care practices like core aeration that allow the water to percolate, and planting deep-rooted native plants, doing conservation landscaping. So replacing sections of the lawn with native plants like sedges or native flowers, meadows. Those deep native plant roots absorb a lot more water. And then the practices that we're doing to increase the soil organic matter, not just in your vegetable garden, but all the way across the lawn. The stuff that we started out with, grass cycling, leaf mulching, leaving leaves in place, all of those practices increase the soil organic matter, which dramatically increases the absorption of the soil. So that's another example of capturing precipitation where it falls. So you can see maybe why I started with recycling yard debris on site, because it's going to also help us be successful in this next habit of capturing precipitation where it falls, allowing it to percolate into the groundwater. That way it eventually flows into the stream, but over a much slower process through the groundwater. And it's not going to just run off, creating flash floods downslope. Also, number three, plant and conserve a wide array of native plants. Right now, the yardstick says four. Four is not very many in terms of an ecosystem. Um, I'm going to take it up a notch and say 10 or more native plant species, and not just planting them, but identifying and protecting, conserving the ones that are already there if they're growing in the right place. So, we're going to be talking a lot about planting, conserving a wide array of native plants. Does that address all three of these issues: water quality, climate resilience, and biodiversity? Doris says yes. Yes, so does Patricia. Yes, great. I agree. So these are my top three. Um, I hope Judy's on because I want her to see that I put actively manage invasive plants in here as a keystone habit. And if she's not here, call her up and tell her that I put it in here because I do believe it's that important. Okay, because this is going to address some of the same issues of water quality, climate resilience, allow more of those native plants to come in and occupy, take their place. And but we have to stay on top of them. Now, I'm going to talk at the very end about emphasizing process over perfection. What we want to see is that people are actively managing, and they may not have eradicated every scrap of invasive plants, but they're working on it. They've got a plan and they're working on it. They're striving to eliminate. They're not adding invasive plants and they're working on controlling them and pulling them out as they pop up and trying to manage them early. So what that looks like, that's something that's probably its own whole topic, and we will be having a session on invasive plants. And I've invited Judy as a guest, and we'll have a discussion about what it looks like to properly and actively manage invasive plants. Now, what about minimizing hazards to wildlife? Minimize hazards to wildlife. How does that meet the criteria? Let's look at the criteria again. Multiple benefits, universally apply to most suburban urban locations, relatively low, no cost, clear and easy to grasp, simple to articulate. The habit loop applies. It's not too general or too specific. What do you think about that last one? Minimize hazards to what? Would you know what to tell people? Would they know what to do? What it means? Karen says too general. Dora says no. Wouldn't know what that means. So I'm going to agree that minimize hazards to wildlife is probably too general. It was my starting point because I know I want a point up there about minimizing hazards to wildlife. And I know that when we update the yardstick this year, we've got to say more specific stuff about what we're going to do for wildlife. Um, Too specific might be turn lights out during songbird migration because turning lights out at night has benefits beyond songbird migration. Um, I think just right is an example would be to turn lights out at night. One, we're wasting electricity. We're burning a lot of electricity. There's a climate issue right there. Um, but also, it's an impact on native insect populations. It's an impact on moths. It's an impact on all of the insects that are attracted to the lights, as well as impacting songbirds during migration. That's only a short part of the year. It's fall and spring migration. But having lights burning all night long has impacts all throughout spring, summer, fall, throughout insect life cycles. So I think we probably want to get a little more specific and get to turning lights out at night. And then we get multiple benefits from that. Yes. Okay. So you're going to have a chance to identify now your own keystone habit from the Baywise yardstick. And I see a lot of examples about rodenticide and poisoning insects. And I think that we need to have something in there about the inappropriate use of chemicals. So here's your chance. Now, it doesn't have to be about that. I just see people bringing some really good examples to the chat box. We're going to create some breakout groups. Briefly introduce yourself. Then I'm going to ask you to skim the current Baywise yardstick. Just pick a section you're interested in. Maybe something your group is really jazzed about talking about. As a group, work together to see if you can identify one additional keystone habit that you think we should promote in 2025. So it might or might not currently be stated in the yardstick. It might represent a group of practices or not be in there at all yet. Maybe it's something that we need to bring to people's attention. So be sure to come back and be ready to discuss. So let's see. I'm going to put the link to the yardstick in the chat box. Okay. So if you didn't bring your yardstick with you or you don't have a copy, there's the link to it in the chat box. We're just going to take about 5 minutes for this discussion. I'm sorry it has to be short, but just share your ideas. And I need to make a breakout. Where do we put breakout groups? How many people do we have right now? Can you see
Like
Elizabeth?
120.
120? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so if I make 20 breakout rooms, we'll have about 6 people per group. We're going to randomly assign breakout groups. Just take a minute to introduce yourself and then see if you can identify another keystone habit in the yardstick. Everybody should have an invitation to join now. Okay, if you stepped away for a minute, we created breakout groups. We're going to take 5 minutes to talk about come up with another potential keystone habit out of the yardstick. Hmm. And if you didn't get assigned to a group, I'm going to assign you right now. So you should get an invitation to join a group in just a moment coming up on your screen. Okay, Lauren, I'm putting you in a group now. Okay, just working my way through the list here, people that didn't get assigned. Carolyn, did you get a breakout group? Did you get assigned to a breakout group? Is there anybody that did not get an invitation to a breakout group?
Can you send me back to room 6?
Sure. Did you get an invite there? Danita, did you get an invitation for a breakout group?
No.
No? Let's see. What happened? It says you were assigned to room 7. So I'll try to give you a different group. Did an invite show up? Roseanne, did you get an invitation to a breakout group? You should have an invitation to join a group. Okay, welcome back. I did want to share some of my examples here on minimizing hazards to wildlife, because people were making some great suggestions in the chat box earlier. I would love to hear if any of your groups hit on or started to hit on a keystone habit for Baywise. You can raise your hand or go ahead and put it in the chat box. Did any groups come up with a new keystone habit for Baywise to put forth? William, what was it? Do you mind unmuting and sharing?
Yes. Well, we were discussing the yardstick, so I told him that it's better practices on how in the products that we use at home. For example, the dishwashing, how's the laundry detergent, etc., or washing or the product that we use to wash our cars, because all of that goes to our drainages eventually. So if we
Yeah.
use better products, that's a better environmental practice.
Okay. Okay. Great. So, reduce the amount of soaps and detergents going into waterways.
Yeah, at least educate people to look at the products that they're consuming
Yeah.
by using the ones that the environmental agencies promote. Like for example, the EPA website has that
Yeah.
brand that puts some products that we know that they're safe and ethical to use.
Yeah. Great. So use biodegradable green products. Check the EPA list. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Um, Lindsay, what did you talk about mulching?
We talked about mulching um, with shredded leaves instead of wood mulch, and also talking about mulching with less than people might be used to would be healthier for
Yeah.
their plant.
So replacing bark mulch in particular, is it the bark mulch that you would replace? Okay. Great. Okay, so there are a lot of great habits coming up in the chat box. So be sure to check out what people are sharing in the chat box. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to change behaviors in society. So not just individual change. And also, I saw a lot of comments earlier about how some of these changes can be a hard sell because they don't appeal to people's current tastes or aesthetics. They might not like how it looks, but also think that there are so many people that are reaching out to us for help who do want to make a difference, so much that we have waiting lists, and we have waiting lists of people that want to get trained, and we're working on that. So we're going to start with those people that are actually highly motivated and are coming to us, but they just want to know how to do it differently. So we're going to help them figure out how to connect some of these practices with the things that they say they love, whether it's birds, butterflies, fireflies. If people don't like how leaf litter looks, ask them, do you enjoy fireflies in the summer? Fireflies depend on leaf litter, and that's where they spend a large portion of their life cycle is in the leaf litter and they overwinter. So, um, talking to them a little bit about how the life cycle of some of the species they do recognize, know, and love depend on some of these different practices can really change the way a person sees it. But let's go on to now that we know that changing habits is possible but hard, how can we use this knowledge to influence environmental behavior change in our communities? So there's a really interesting review, Mazur et al., about improving habits to changing habits to improve our habitat is what it's called. But they talk about they review a lot of different research and studies that and we're able to identify three types of strategies that are effective for making environmental behavior change at the societal level. One is to reduce or apply friction, so make it easier to do a certain habit or harder to do an undesirable habit. Two, establishing clear cues to action that are visual or prompt that routine or action you want them to do. And also offer or promote psychologically informed incentives. So let's break this down just a little bit. Friction. Friction is about making a desirable habit easier by reducing friction. For an example, there was a study that showed just by reducing the number of steps to the recycling bin, dramatically increased the number of people that recycled in an office setting. Or making an undesirable habit harder by increasing the friction. So the example they talk about is resetting the default. For example, setting a lower thermostat default temperature. Make a person work to have to do the more undesirable behavior, which is consuming more energy, set the default to a different way of doing things. So if you think about the leaf litter, if we make it super easy for everybody to just dump their leaves on the curb and have them hauled off on a truck, that just becomes the default behavior. It's what people feel like they're expected to do. It's free, it's easy. Is there a way to make that a slight bit harder? An example through friction would be it would have to be something that somebody signed up for. They would have to actually sign up for the service, or make it a little bit harder or assign a little extra fee to that. That's just one example of how different types of environmental practices have been changed through friction. Cues to action. This is about posting very clear cues to prompt action. So what's happening on the left symbol? What's that telling us to do? No words at all, but do you know what you're supposed to do when you see that symbol? You're supposed to pick
Yes,
up your
perfect.
poop and not just scoop the poop, but deposit it properly. Okay, so that one little graphic says a lot. We all recognize this recycling symbol. What does the one on the right tell us to do? It suggests, oh, hey, let's leave those leaves. Let's not send them off on a truck to a facility or a dump somewhere. So these are examples of cues to action. And the third one, psychologically informed incentives. This is like a small fee to discourage a certain behavior or a reward to encourage certain behaviors. So examples of successful incentives are bag fees, container deposits, rebates. A Baywise example is that there are Maryland native plant rebates available through DNR, and even some counties have extra special rebates or coupons. So making sure that your clients know that there are these rebates out there that you can get a coupon. I got $50 coupons for the native trees I purchased, and that was nice. It was a nice little incentive to go native. I was going to do it anyways, but some people might actually find that encouraging to know, or they might be able to do more if they're getting those financial rewards and incentives. And the last thing I want to share with you, this resource is fantastic. It's the Chesapeake Behavior Change Campaign. Well, it's just the organization, it's called Chesapeake Behavior Change. And it was created through the Chesapeake Bay program. And it's a step-by-step guide for implementing behavior change. I just want you to focus in right now on step one. Identify a single end state behavior you want to change. So what I want you to think about is when we're asking people to change 36 things all at once, that's just so much. And when you look at the science of behavior change, really working step by step on one behavior is really what's going to affect the greatest change over a landscape. Step two, identify your priority audience and measure the behavior baseline. That's something that we want to do at a statewide level. So I'm going to be working out ways that we can begin to capture that information as people are coming into the program, find out what practices they're already doing, which practices or habits are they interested in implementing, and then be able to follow up with them and track behavior change. Through the process of talking to people, though, you can start to identify what the barriers are to changing those behaviors and what are the benefits. You can help make those connections too through your own experience as to the benefits of those behavior changes. Develop your campaign. That's our Baywise program and the materials we have and we'll be working on. Implement your behavior change campaign and then measure and evaluate behavior change. Right now, it's very hard for us to do that because the only data that I have are the signs. I don't know how many people have started composting. I don't know because of our program, I don't know how many people have planted native plants or how many people are having trouble finding native plants in their county. So as we get organized to be able to collect some of this information on a statewide level, that's going to help us to hone our activities as Baywise Master Gardeners. I'm going to provide the link here. I'm going to provide it in the chat box, and I'll also put this on the website when we post our recording. Okay, so that link to Chesapeake Behavior Change is right in the chat box now. And we're just about to our final concluding statement. So my wish for Baywise Waterwise 2025 is to focus on the process over perfection. Okay, I feel like it's more important to get 500 people to change one keystone habit than one property or one landscape certified in a year, because we're working on making a difference over a larger landscape. So I want everyone to think about, how do we welcome all newcomers, even if they're just ready to take the first step? Start with one actionable habit change, focus on highlighting one or a few keystone habits. Consider the psychology we've talked today about habit change. Establish that cue, routine, reward. That's going to happen through conversations and reflections. Share your own experiences in why you find it rewarding to do things the way you do them. Track your changes, show abundant empathy, focus on building those relationships in the community, and find ways to celebrate with people along the way, step by step. Celebrate those small actions with big rewards. And sometimes you just being the one there saying, way to go. I'm so happy to hear that you did it, or that it's working out for you, or being there to answer a question. That might be the reward, that human connection. So think about how important each one of those human connections and interactions is to building community. You are part of the reward. So in conclusion, if you had one takeaway that you could share in the chat box from today's training that you might consider incorporating into your Baywise Waterwise work, I would love for you to go ahead and share that in the chat box. And if you would like to receive continuing education credit for today's training, please complete a brief assessment. I'm going to put the assessment link in the chat box. You don't have to do it during the session, but bookmark it, save yourself the link. I'll also send that out in a follow-up message. And this is all stuff you've seen tonight and that you should now be pretty familiar with. Okay, Margaret says, focus on one step at a time. Keep it simple. Yes, thank you. William says, better educate and show how to develop a habit. Yes. Deborah says, thank you very much for this. It's been interesting and exciting. I'm so glad. I have been obsessed with preparing this. I've been so excited about this topic. I've been working on it for several months. Thank you very much, Deborah. Christy says, awesome new way of thinking. Looking forward to the simplification. Connie says, thank you. Excited to get the yardstick simplified. So I will be working on that. I am working on that, and we are having Baywise coordinator meetings starting. Our first one is this Friday. So we're doing those regional coordinator meetings where I will actively be seeking input on the yardstick on some of these things. Some of my initial ideas, I've gotten a lot of expert input from our extension faculty and staff, and I really want to hear from you. Be sure you're talking to your Baywise coordinators as well. Rhonda says, like merging components into keystone areas. Kara asked, when will there be a new training? So this for new certified Baywise Master Gardeners. I am working on the curriculum, and I'm hoping to be able to start rolling that out in March and April. But once I've got it, I'm going to be offering twice a week, noon or evening sessions. And I want to get as many people certified as want to go through the program this year. So I'm trying to be thoughtful so that we've got the new yardstick structure, and then we're doing the training aligned with the yardstick. Okay, so we'll be posting the link to the February 20th training. We'll do that in the next couple of weeks. Elizabeth and I will work on that together, and we will get that registration out at least 2 weeks before the next training. Okay. All right. So Sharon says, provided a nice framework to get our message across using the cue, routine, reward. And even if you're not talking about this in terms of like psychology or habit loop when you're talking to people, if you're just talking about the reward you get from seeing that bluebird take a drink in the water, or having 12 bluebirds in your yard, or having monarchs visit your way station, or whatever the reward is that you get from your work. When you're sharing that in a way that's passionate and full of enthusiasm, that's going to be contagious, but also helping people connect with their passion. If somebody just really, really wants to have hummingbirds in their yard, and you talk to them about coral honeysuckle and some tips on growing it, like that could be the thing that sets them afire. That's where they start, because that's the thing that they really, really care about. And then you follow up with them and say, are you ready to take the next step? I'm here to help you. So let's think about how we can restructure the way we do things so that we're creating this nurturing, mentoring, community building environment. So I know we're a little over, and I really appreciate that you were all interactive and willing to do the breakouts and try the exercises and activities. Thank you so much for staying a few minutes extra. Thanks for being here tonight, Elizabeth. Thanks everybody who joined. We will be posting the recording in the next couple of days, and I'll send a follow-up message letting you know that it's up there and following up with that assessment link. If you did not get a chance to do our demographic survey, I'll include that as well. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks for all that you do. Our next training will be in February, and we'll be adding extra sessions as we develop them. Okay, thank you. Good night. Oh, the assessment didn't take all the answers?
Here's my-
Okay, if you have any trouble with the assessment, send me a little note. Was there a particular question that it wouldn't take? That wouldn't work? Karen? Okay, I'll look into that. I'll see what kind of results come in. If it looks like there's anything funny going on with it, I'll try to address it.
Stacy, I didn't get the assessment. I
You
clicked
did?
on, okay.
What happened?
Oh, there it is. It wouldn't
Yeah.
open.
Oh, okay. I'm going to put it in the
Yes.
chat box one more time. Now, I think once you do this, I can just send a list to our Master Gardener coordinator, Steph Pooley, and say, hey, these are the folks that did the assessment. Please give them their continuing education credit. If I run into any trouble with that, I'll get it sorted out. But I think that's how it works. So go ahead and test yourself with the mini quiz. It's in there in the chat box if you need it one more time. Did it open for you? Okay, Heather was able to submit it. Mikhail, you didn't get, do you see it now, Mikhail? Okay.
Oh yeah, I see it. Thank you. I see it.
I see it now. I see it now.
Okay, Anne was able to open and submit it. Well, I'm glad it's working. Okay, good, good. I'm going to stay on a minute because I have to see if I can save my chat. Yes, there we go. So I can read all your comments. That's my favorite part, is reading the chat. I've got
I
to.
copied them for you, but yeah,
Oh, good. Okay, thank you, Elizabeth.
welcome.
'Cause I love to read the whole chat. I love to hear every single thing that people say, and I have to keep pushing myself to move it along because I want to respond in the chat too. Thanks, Esther.
It was a good class, a good
I
training.
am not, dear. I'm sitting here at the table. I haven't done anything.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Stacy, this is Esther.
But they were my
I wanted
AirPods. I
to
guess
know-
so.
I wanted to know if our water audit can be incorporated in the BWAT. What we do is go to residents' homes and check for areas where water could be coming in their homes, and also water that is running off the property, and what they can do to prevent the runoff and to have it soak in the land. I can send you a copy of what we do.
Yeah, is that through Prince George's County, the
Yes.
resource? Okay,
Yeah.
please do send that to me.
Okay.
Yeah, because now is
Okay.
the time we're wide open for reviewing and reevaluating how we do it, and are there these sort of high level keystone habits or practices we really, really want to be promoting. and we can rework it. And I'm seeing this as a living document at this point that
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna probably have to do annual updates as
Mm-hmm.
new practices
You're
emerge,
right.
new
Right.
research comes out, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, please send it along and I'll look it over.
Okay. Thank you. It was a
Okay, you're
good
so
question.
welcome.
Hmm.
Thanks, Esther.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.
Diana, I see your question. Could I do class online? Is broken frozen part delayed me? Oh, oh yeah. Yeah. So you should be able to go back and look at the recording and finish and catch up with the first half. And then you can do the assessment if you want to do it for continuing education credit. Or you can just do it just to check for understanding, just to see like, did I get it all? Okay. All right. Sorry, I'm so sorry about your pipe. That is, yeah, that is like the worst. What a pain. I've been there. We turn all of our water faucets like to the outdoors off and then insulate them. But then it makes that bird bath, cleaning the bird bath and everything that I do outside with water is a lot harder because I have to bring it inside. But I don't want to live through a frozen pipe ever again. All fixed with a hairdryer, good. Yep, yep. Good job. Okay, good night, everyone. Does anyone else have any other questions or did you have trouble with any of the links? Okay, I'm gonna sign off then. Good night, good night.